these are the ideas that everyone thought were dead. Political analysts also said Mr. Le Pen's remarks would probably make it harder for Mr. Chirac's coalition to agree to cooperate with Mr. Le Pen to help defeat the Socialist Party in next year's election. In other words, you see, you can help determine the shape of our government as long as you stay off the large majorities in the world. And just stay off of the what? The minority, the true minority in the world. As long as you can defame black people and African people, you can help determine the shape of the European government, of the French government. But as soon as you then talk about a very small minority in the world, you have made a major, major misstep, and you will pay for it. A very interesting kind of situation there. However, despite all of this, they ultimately recognize that if large populations were truly to unite and were truly to develop a national consciousness, were truly to approach the world in terms of cultural and nationalistic interests, they recognize ultimately then the power would have to shift. And of course, we know then that is one of the major reasons why the European must minorize large groups of people and must make people who are ethnically the same think of themselves as being ethnically different. On a larger consumer market, only a larger consumer market can support much broad-based industrial scientific innovation, which often spins off into the military field. And he goes on and talks about, later on he talks about, and culture counts. Values count. If the peoples of the world admire Western values and seek to adopt them, we are what? Stronger and safer. So you think then, with this kind of attitude, that African values will be permitted to flourish among African people if we leave it up to them to determine what values are there? There is another, to be poor, blacks and Hispanics have higher fertility rates than whites. Although middle-class blacks have lower fertility rates than middle-class whites. Very interesting situation there as well. Have we, as black people, been so concerned with living in the European lifestyle that we've given up reproduction? Yet, many of us who are in the so-called middle class have done exactly that. This situation also illustrates the very deadly nature of European society and its very opposition to African values. You must recognize when you read Freudian psychology, at the bottom of that psychology is a critique of European society. A society that comes to hate sex. A society that sees sexuality as its enemy, as in opposition to civilization. A society that denies its gods sex and sexuality is a society ultimately that's going to be a deadly one. How can you have fear and hatred and antipathy toward the very source of life and not ultimately side with death itself? And I think one of the major reasons this society has become deadly and a threat to the life of the very world itself is that it has problems with its own sexuality. And it has problems with the very basic nature of man. It has such a problem then that those who have the most to give to children, you would think, in terms of wealth, knowledge, and so forth, are the very ones that what? Do not have them. There's a problem there, ladies and gentlemen. And it's interesting to note then that this is diametrically opposed to the African sense and to African values that look at life and growth and development as a great value. But yet we note as African adopts these European values, they will also adopt the deadly nature of Europeans to the point often of killing their own children or denying them birth or denying them conception in the first place. And now the European is beginning to see the result of the philosophy that they have put forth. What happens in America? He goes, and it's interesting to note that this is one of the challenges. Further, recent immigrants have higher fertility rates than other Americans. By the way, some of you might have read 2 or 3 years ago about the browning of America. The idea that the Hispanics are moving in so rapidly that at the rate they're going, they'll soon be America's largest minority. There will be more Hispanics in this country than blacks, and that at the rate they're going, we'll literally have a brown America. That's a major question we have to deal with too, ladies and gentlemen, by the way. What will happen to the black population in this country as it is outnumbered by the Hispanic population, or as it is balanced off by Asian immigration? That's a challenge that our children must be educated to meet. I know it's a question we hate to deal with, and often we want to lump a lot of problems on the white and non-white, forgetting, though, that we as people have to compete against all people on this earth. Africa has to compete against Latin America as well for markets in this United States and other places. And we have to compete with other non-white people. And the idea then, and we just cannot let then other non-white people just function the way they want to without also looking at it in terms of what it means in terms of our own self-development, growth, and survival as a people. The influx then of Hispanics in this family, in this country, will have a major impact upon the quality of black life in this country. And I think those of you who, of course, go in the black community can already see that. Those of you who may go to Miami can already see it in very clear terms. And in certain parts of New Jersey can see it. And yet it's an issue that we don't want to face. The rate is less than that if illegal immigrants are counted. And let me go back. Today, fewer than 20% of legal immigrants to America are of white European stock. The rate is even less than that if illegal immigrants are counted in. There is little reason to think this will change. Birth rates in Western Europe are so low these days, there's hardly anyone left to leave. In other words, hardly any whites to come over anymore. Today, about 80% of the current total United States population is of white European stock. At roughly current rates of fertility and immigration, demographers Leon Bouvier and Robert Gardner have projected that by the year 2080, the white European share of the U.S. population will be down to 60% and will be shrinking. With a higher rate of immigration, it will only be 50%. Very interesting. Reminds me of that movie, War of the Worlds, when it looked like the aliens were taking over and then they died because of disease. Will the European die out? Will our problem be solved by their mere death? While we may take some pride in that if they don't increase the rate of babies they're having, we may be faced with another problem, though. Are we to get the European off of our backs only to have the Asian and others on our backs? So the idea that the European may die away or fade away should not give us too much relief, because we are still faced with the challenge of other groups exploiting us as well. What happens in America with birth dearth conditions under these scenarios? I think it will yield some unnecessary social turbulence. But it's interesting. I can't read you all of it because it's a long piece. I would hope you get a chance to read some of the pieces. I just want to indicate one or two other things when he talks about the time to pay attention and so forth. As I reflect on our situation, it seems that the real and lasting solution to our problem is not finally to be found in the realm of politics, the tax code, or the immigration code. Our central problem is in the realm of the spirit. An interesting statement, I think. For in the last analysis, it is our spirit that shapes our politics, our tax codes, and our immigration codes. So what are we saying? The spirit that indwells in people ultimately determine all of the other things. He goes on to say, but suppose we could re-inspirit this generation, he's talking about his generation of whites, to understand and take pride in the fact that they are a part of a remarkable, potent, productive, humane, beneficent culture. Well, what happens when we tell ourselves that as African people? We are engaging in what? Self-segregation? Superiority complexes of some kind? But yet this man recognizes that the survival of European people depends on what? Inculcating in their current generation a sense of what? Culture, a sense of themselves as a people. Not getting rid of their culture, not getting rid of their identity, not trying to emerge with another people, but building up a greater sense of identity relating to each other socially, economically, politically, and sexually to maintain their dominance in the world. For in the last analysis, it is our spirit that shapes our politics, as he goes on to say. So suppose our young people came to know in the marrow of the bones that the West is, as Lincoln said, the last best hope of mankind. These deadly people, these people who threaten every bit of life on earth, these enslavers, these exploiters, still dare to see themselves as what? The last best hope of mankind. Very interesting statement. It shows, though, that whites must not only indulge in the deception of African people, but they must indulge what? In their own self-deception. The last hope of mankind, the last best hope of mankind. Suppose it was explained that only they can preserve it. They, who threaten to destroy it, can preserve it, and that there is something real to fear if they don't. If such a spiritual rekindling actually takes place among our young people, it might rejuvenate, even save, a civilization that has been a long time in building, one of the shortest lived civilizations that ever existed on this earth. And yet, in that shortest period of time, has done more to destroy man than any other civilization that has ever existed. You talk about an Egyptian civilization that lasts thousands of years. And yet this civilization within a space of 200 or 300 years has killed and destroyed and raped and robbed more than all of the previous civilizations put together. And yet it dares to see itself as the last great hope of mankind. After all, it's not such a big deal. All it involves is having another baby. Is that right? I must wrap it up here. I like the concept of spirit. One of the things I talk about in my current book is the concept of spirit possession. And I'm bringing back some concepts. You know, when you get into Afrocentric psychology, you begin to see where some concepts that have been put down, and I'll be through in a minute, by Europeans, are very functional in African psychology. One of the things that they like to talk about, of course, is this idea of spirit possession. And we think as a modern civilization that we've gotten over that belief in spirit possession, that people can actually be possessed by devils. But ladies and gentlemen, that is not true at all. People of every age are possessed in one form or another. What spirit possesses you depends upon the ideas that are accepted at the time. When the devil as a real entity was accepted by the culture and by the bulk of the population, the devil actually possessed people. You could actually talk to the devil and people. You could call them out, you know. And some of you saw the movie The Exorcist, and the devil is talking and carrying on. This actually occurs. And it's an interesting phenomena in human life. How do you feel Jesus? How do you feel any God? To a good extent, you have to have an idea of that God, don't you? Somebody has to kind of tell you about it, don't they? You kind of have to know about it a bit. Once you get an idea in your mind, once somebody describes Damballa to you or describes this one to you, what can happen? The description can actually manifest itself in your body. You actually experience it as a physical presence. You know, during certain rituals, you can tell what spirit possesses an individual by the very physiognomy of their face and body, by the very way they behave, by the very way they dance, the way they talk. Each spirit has an identity such that when it possesses the individual, that identity expresses itself through the body and the behavior of that individual. So then, what are we saying here then? When you give a person a complex of ideas and they accept that complex of ideas can express itself concretely in the body and the behavior of that individual and affect the way that individual relates to another people. And it's interesting then, when the devil possesses a person, the devil exploits that person's body, uses that person's body, abuses that person's body, relates to other people in a devilish sort of way. Now then, we've gotten over the devil, But the devil has not really disappeared. Now we believe in unconscious forces. But if you study them